In the fall of 1979, Eva and I had quit our jobs to take a year-long trip around the Mediterranean countries. We booked passage on a Yugoslav freighter to Europe and spent 5 months traveling around Spain, Morocco, Tunisia, Egypt, and Crete. 3 years earlier, we had been to Israel, Greece, and Yugoslavia. Our next destination was Italy, so we headed for Venice, where we checked into the Hotel Adua and spent a week revisiting the city which we fell in love with 3 years ago. In early April, Eva and I began our 4-month journey around Italy by train. Our first whistle stop was Verona. Verona still has remnants of the Roman Empire. Pedestrian Street leads to the well-preserved Roman Arena. It seats 25,000 people and is still used as an open-air opera house every summer. From the upper tiers, we got a fine view of the city and the market square. Among Verona's medieval jewels is this Romanesque church with its stunning facade of 12th century marble and bronze scenes. The church's cloister is another Romanesque gem. Verona was a setting for Shakespeare's play Romeo and Juliet, and most tourists flock to the alleged home of Juliet to see the famous balcony that has been reconstructed in the courtyard. The Adige River flows through town. A fortified bridge leads over the river to a 14th century castle built by the Scaliger family. From the castle ramparts, we get a wonderful panoramic view of Verona. Vicenza is the hometown of one of Italy's best-known architects, Palladio. In the 16th century, he filled the city with neoclassical palaces and churches. He designed the central piazza, a colossal square of grand arches and columns, which is most impressive when it's lit up in the evening. Perhaps Palladio's greatest achievement was the Teatro Olimpico, a pseudo-Roman theater whose stage still has the original set that was designed for the opening performance of Oedipus Rex some 400 years ago. It's a fantastic illusion of fake perspectives representing the streets of Thebes. We came back that evening to see a performance. Palladio also studded the hills surrounding the city with elaborate country villas for the rich patrician families of Vicenza. It's these villas that provided the models for the plantation mansions of America's antebellum South. Scarlett O'Hara would feel right at home in any one of them. Padua is a busy city of dark arcaded streets opening onto bright sunny squares. One piazza features an ornate 15th century clock that still keeps perfect time. Another piazza consists of an oval island surrounded by a canal lined with dozens of statues. In the background is the imposing Basilica of San Antonio, with Donatello's famous bronze statue of a horse and rider out front. But Padua's greatest treasure is the Scrovegni Chapel. It's stark and simple on the outside, but inside the walls and ceilings are covered with richly colored frescoes by the artist Giotto, depicting the life of Christ from birth to death. Padua has been a university town for some 600 years. The students' favorite hangout is Cafe Petruchio, so named because Shakespeare's Taming of the Shrew was set in Padua. Ferrara was ruled by the Este family in the Middle Ages. They built a formidable brick castle with a moat and drawbridge right smack in the center of town. Lucretia Borgia lived here for a while. In the cellar dungeon, one of the Este dukes had his wife killed for having an affair with his brother. This was the inspiration for Browning's famous poem, My Last Duchess. Also in town is an Este palace called Palazzo Diamante. Its hostile facade consists of small marble blocks cut into facets like diamonds. On the outskirts of town is another Este palace, deserted and crumbling with overgrown vines. It was a setting of Vittorio De Sica's film Garden of the Finzi Contini. Bologna is a city of orange-red buildings and endless rows of arcades lining its streets. The heart of the old city is a vast piazza with a bronze Neptune splashing in a 16th century fountain. In another piazza, two leaning towers erected in the Middle Ages tilt precariously, looking like a giant pair of scissors. And in a third piazza, San Stefano Church actually consists of four little interlocking Romanesque churches. The University of Bologna was founded in 1088 and claims to be the oldest university in the world. It's hard to believe that the small town of Ravenna was once the western capital of the Byzantine Empire. All that remains of her imperial past are some 5th and 6th century churches, tombs, and baptistries. Two basilicas are embellished inside with the most exquisite Byzantine mosaics Eva and I had ever seen. San Marino is spectacularly situated on a rocky mountain cliff. It's the smallest and oldest republic in the world. The place is a shameless tourist trap, but at least it offers panoramic vistas of the mountains and the distant sea. Florence nestles along the Arno River in the Tuscan hills. The 14th century domed cathedral rises above the town. It's the largest church in the world after St. Peter's in Rome. Next to it stands the marble campanile, designed by Giotto and considered the most beautiful bell tower in the world. We climbed the 400 steps to the top. Nearby is the octagonal baptistry. Its famous bronze doors depict biblical scenes, and its interior is equally impressive. The nearby Piazza della Signoria is pure theater. It's studded with nude statues. At night, the statues are illuminated, and it's pretty spooky. Overlooking the piazza is the 14th century Palazzo Vecchio, with its lavishly decorated apartments. It's here that we find the most famous statue of all, Michelangelo's David. The Uffizi Palace extends from the piazza down to the Arno River. It contains the best collection of Renaissance paintings and sculpture in the world. That's because in the 15th century, the wealthy Medici family were enthusiastic patrons of the arts. The Medicis also commissioned the San Lorenzo Church to build extravagant chapels and hired Michelangelo to sculpt their tomb. Other wealthy families built grandiose palaces in the heart of the medieval city. Many members of these families are buried in the Santa Croce Church, which has a splendid cloister. The San Marco Monastery is another of Florence's gems. Its library is decorated with lovely frescoes by Fra Angelico. Upstairs, the tiny monks' cells overlook the cloister, and each one has its own Angelico fresco painted on the wall to encourage meditation. Several bridges span the Arno River. Ponte Vecchio is the most famous bridge. It's lined with tiny picturesque shops. It's quite a sight when lit up at night. The Pitti Palace is on the opposite bank from the old town. It contains no less than 5 museums, as well as lavishly furnished royal apartments. From the Pitti Palace, the Boboli Gardens climb in terraces up to the Romanesque church of San Miniato. From its patio, a magnificent view opens over Florence. We stayed at the Hotel Davanzati for our 2 weeks in Florence. And yes, that's me in the window. The picturesque province of Tuscany lies between Florence and Rome. Medieval hill towns dot the Tuscan landscape. From a distance, the skyline of San Gimignano resembles a miniature version of New York's skyscrapers. That's because way back in the 14th century, the powerful noble families built fortress towers as high as they could to use as defense during attacks. We climbed to the top of several towers to get a bird's-eye view of the town and surrounding countryside. That's Eva coming down from one of the towers. Today, San Gimignano is really a gentle, laid-back little town, whose churches are adorned with radiant frescoes. We stayed overnight at the Hotel Leon Bianca, right in the Old Town Square. Siena winds haphazardly over 3 red clay hills, from which the color sienna gets its name. The central piazza is dominated by a tall clock tower. We climbed to the top of the tower to get a view of the red brick pavement that opens out like a monumental fan, and the dramatic shadow that the clock tower casts over the piazza. A horse race called the Palio is held in the piazza every summer, as it has been since the 17th century. Sienna's 13th century Gothic cathedral has a domed roof, a striped bell tower, and a richly decorated marble facade. We climbed to the top of the bell tower for another stunning view of Siena. We stayed for 3 days at the Hotel Bernini in Siena. This was the view from our roof patio. From Siena, we continued south through Tuscany, stopping and staying overnight at various hill towns. We always found clean and comfortable family-run hotels, often with rooftop patios. We finally arrived in Rome on May 7th. We checked into the Pension Giuliana and spent the next 3 weeks exploring the city. We started each day with breakfast at the cafe next door. Rome wasn't built in a day, but over the ages. For 500 years, from 27 BC to 476 AD, it was the capital of the Roman Empire, and the Forum was the center of the ancient city. This is where Nero fiddled and Julius Caesar was assassinated. Palatine Hill rises above the Forum ruins. Here we find the palaces of the Roman emperors Mark Antony, Tiberius, and Augustus. The palaces overlook the Circus Maximus, where chariot races were held. Just beyond the Forum, the Arch of Constantine leads to the Colosseum. Built in 90 AD, the Colosseum could seat 50,000 spectators. It was the place where gladiators battled and Christians were thrown to the lions. The lions were kept in dens below the arena floor. We climbed right up to the top row for an overall view of the place. Caracalla's baths were the grandest of ancient Rome's public baths. They could accommodate 1,600 bathers at a time. 2,000 years later, the ruins form a majestic backdrop for open-air operatic performances every summer. The Pantheon is the best preserved building of Roman antiquity. Built by Emperor Hadrian as a pagan temple, it's still considered a marvel of ancient construction, mainly because of its circular plan and majestic dome. A central hole in the famous dome allows in light, as well as rain and pigeon droppings. Hadrian also built an impressive mausoleum on the banks of the Tiber River, which flows through Rome. It was converted into a castle in the Middle Ages. An original Roman bridge crosses the river to the castle. With the fall of the Roman Empire, the city of Rome fell into decay. It wasn't until the 15th century that it regained prominence as the center of the Roman Catholic papacy. The popes commissioned Michelangelo, Bernini, and other Renaissance artists and architects to glorify the city. As a result, today's Rome is a city of spectacularly theatrical streets and piazzas. In Piazza di Spagna, Bernini's Fountain of a Sinking Ship lies at the foot of the grand Spanish steps, which ascend in curves to the obelisk and Baroque church at the top. In Piazza Navona, Bernini's three fountains represent the Nile, the Danube, and the Ganges. In the Trevi Fountain, Neptune water skis over the waves in a chariot drawn by tritons. The fountain has starred in many international films, such as La Dolce Vita. Campo dei Fiori is a piazza full of colorful market stalls. In the center of the square, a statue marks the spot where heretics were burned at the stake in the 16th century. Many of the city's finest palaces have been turned into art galleries and national museums. A $4 museum card gave us access to all of them. Best of the lot is the 17th century Villa Borghese. Its sumptuous rooms display sculptures and paintings by such artists as Bernini, Canova, Raphael, Caravaggio, Rubens, and Titian. Rome's medieval churches were also remodeled by the Renaissance and Baroque masters, who added lavish artworks to the interior. The cloisters were often adorned with columns taken from the ancient Roman temples, at a time when the popes had no use for the pagan monuments. And every church has a fountain where today's couples compose for their wedding picture. In the Church of the Capuchin monks, underground chapels are decorated with the skulls and bones of former friars. On the outskirts of Rome, we find the entrance to the catacombs. Early Christians hollowed these tunnels out of the rock, then buried their dead in the underground labyrinths. Christianity attains its glorious climax in Vatican City, an independent state in the center of Rome under the sovereignty of the Pope. St. Peter's Square is the Vatican's showpiece, a great elliptical piazza bordered by two immense semicircular colonnades. It nicely frames the majestic facade of St. Peter's Church, the largest church in the world. This masterpiece of Renaissance architecture took 120 years to build. The church's showpiece is its dome, designed by Michelangelo. St. Peter's colossal interior is overloaded with decoration. An elevator took us up to the terrace roof of the church, which offered a bird's eye view of St. Peter's Square on one side and a panorama of Vatican City on the other. The next day, Pope John Paul II celebrated his 60th birthday with an outdoor mass in St. Peter's Square. We joined the throng of well-wishers in the square as John Paul glided by on his Pope-mobile. Afterwards, we took a tour of the Vatican Museum, which has a vast collection of the world's best artworks acquired by the popes over the centuries. The most famous is the Sistine Chapel. The popes commissioned the best Renaissance artists to decorate its walls. But Michelangelo outshone them all. He covered the entire ceiling with frescoes depicting the creation, and what powerful compositions they are. He also painted the entire wall behind the altar with an enormous Last Judgment. As for modern Rome, a pedestrian street leads directly to the Piazza Venezia, which is dominated by the 19th century memorial to Italy's first king, Victor Emmanuel. Italians refer to it as either the typewriter or the dentures. Rome's most fashionable street is the elegant Via Veneto. In the evening, it's the gathering place for all the beautiful people, la dolce vita, in other words. But for our last evening in Rome, we went to the Opera House and caught Joan Sutherland in Lucretia Borgia. At Villa d'Este, a water park called Tivoli Gardens is built in terraces down the side of a cliff. Water cascades down, creating waterfalls, fountains, water sprays, and rivulets that empty into a giant fish pool. At Naples, we checked into Albergo Medina for a week. Our room had a small balcony overlooking the Bay of Naples, with Mount Vesuvius in the distance. Naples is an ugly city in a beautiful setting. Two 13th century Norman castles sit on promontories overlooking the bay. A 16th century Spanish castle perches on a hill above the city, and a 17th century Baroque palace faces a glass-domed galleria, a forerunner of the Eden Center. Most of the old churches were redecorated in a gaudy Baroque style. Their interiors often look like a melting Neapolitan ice cream cone. Even the cloisters are a riot of excess. The 19th century San Carlo Theater, on the other hand, is tastefully restrained. We treated ourselves to a Donizetti opera here. But it's the everyday chaotic street life that makes Naples so interesting. When it got to be too much, we took a funicular up to an 18th century palace overlooking the crowded city below. Here we also found the San Martino Monastery, with its breathtaking views over the Bay of Naples. We took a vaporetto ride around the Bay of Naples. We glided past villas and gardens, fishing villages and lighthouses, and spent an hour at the touristy Isle of Ischia before catching the vaporetto back to Naples.